Hello, thank you for attending my talk, Building a Serverless Startup to Manage Enterprise Serverless Solutions. My name is John Liu. I'm a founder of a new startup, and I've been a Microsoft MVP in the Office 365 and the Power Platform space. This is my personal story. I have been a 20-year enterprise developer and a consultant based in Sydney. I do mostly Office 365 customizations and integrations. And from that, I do a lot of user groups and talks about .NET, Office 365, how to integrate that with everything. I do a lot of Power Platform talk. My first job 20 years ago, it was not a successful startup. And at the end of dot-com boom, the founders decided that they will close down. I've always appreciated and admired founders that build startups. So 20 years later, I found a niche to take that leap and make that a reality for me. So hopefully this is something that could be inspiring for you at the various parts of this journey, and hopefully and let me know if this is something that resonated with you, or is this something that you have some feedback for me as well. So this talk is broken into three parts. Firstly, I want to talk about what is the actual business problem. So there are two parts to the title: building the serverless startup, and the goal of it is to monitor enterprise serverless solutions. And the part of the enterprise serverless solutions I really want to talk about is in this first part, which is the enterprise serverless solutions that are rapidly being built within enterprises that are using Microsoft's platform, particularly using Microsoft's Power Platform. So if you're not familiar with the Power Platform, there's a little bit of introduction about what that is and why I think that's a big deal. Um, the second part is what is then the actual technical stack for my startup, and of course, why is it serverless? Serverless solves many challenges that the my startup needs and it's a very deliberate decision about why we choose the serverless stack to build our startup. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I wish I knew, right? There's just so many things that you don't know when you just get started, but I wish I knew some of these things. And maybe you're in a situation where you're nodding your head, or maybe you're in a situation where you're about to take your first leap, and these could be useful nuggets of wisdom. So lessons I wish I knew when I started. What is actual business problem? And to describe this, I'll describe a bit about Microsoft's Power Platform. So the Microsoft's Power Platform is currently there are four products in it: Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate become popular mostly in the last 3 years. I'm particularly focused on Power Apps and Power Automate. And particularly Power Apps is for building front-end applications. So certain developers can build front-end applications very quickly, integrate with a variety of data sources. They could deploy that to web and to mobile. And then Power Automate is a sibling to another Microsoft product in the Azure stack called Azure Logic Apps. Now, if you're not familiar with either Power Automate or Logic Apps, Logic App is similar to something in AWS called step functions. So in step functions, you have basically a serverless way of doing an orchestration of your various functions. So imagine you have lots of lambdas or you have lots of Azure functions, and you needed a way to orchestrate it to say, hey, if this action were to error, I want that to retry. And when I retry, I wanted to do an exponential scale out. Or if that action could potentially fail, then I want to continue with the fail path. Whereas if it was successful, I'll do a success path. So that kind of orchestration of your serverless functions. Now, in both Logic Apps and Power Automate, so on the Microsoft side, in addition to just the orchestration constructs, the branching constructs, parallels, the fan out and fan in, there are also 370 connectors. So these are pre-built connectors with loads of actions that will connect easily to Office 365, Dynamics 365, Azure. So those are first party. but also to third party, to AWS, to Google Apps, to SAP. And then if you go beyond what's out of the box with these connectors, you also have direct HTTP. So you could just call HTTP with any API. Most API endpoints that have an API or a REST endpoint, you can call them. You can call XML web services from over a decade ago. You can call anything that implements an open APIs or a Swagger definition. There is also support for on-premises proxy. So if you wanted to bridge the futuristic serverless online world with your legacy enterprise on-premises systems that are talking old XML web services, there is also an on-prem proxy that will bridge that gap as well. So very, very flexible in terms of building very complex orchestrations, but then also give you that very visual view of how your automation is happening. And similar to function as a service, Logic Apps and Power Automate can be used to create these workflows, and we call them flows. So both in Logic Apps as well as in Step Functions, the workflow that's created is called a flow, and the execution of this flow is called a run. So that there is a particular focus for me to look at as enterprises are scaling out and taking advantage of the Power Platform, which is taking advantage of the Power Platform, then there should be a way to monitor and control the Power Apps and flows that we are creating. There's some insane, crazy numbers. Because Power Platform is bundled, existing Office 365 and Dynamics customers have already access to these products. So what we're seeing then is that in the last 3 years, we have seen a 3.5 million local developers have started using the Power Platform. And in 2020 alone, we have seen an additional 1 million. In terms of companies, we are looking at currently, as of 2020, 300,000 enterprise companies have adopted the Power Platform. So it's a big, massive numbers. And this is a problem I kind of allude to. So imagine that in the past, you will have professional developers building an integration between, say, Office 365 and your CRM, Dynamics 365. That used to be something built by IT with a professional developers team. But now the pieces are so easy to put together. You would have maybe someone that has maybe this is now a system that's being built by the business using and once they build these tools, they then expect IT to manage them or maintain them going forward. So there is this issue where if you take the picture of this map, right? This is a picture of Sydney, and you have these buildings. Imagine these buildings are the applications in your enterprise. So this could be Office 365. This could be your Exchange server. Another one could be your SQL server, your database. Another one could be the Google Docs that you use. Another one is QuickBooks or Xero, where you do your accounting, and so on and so forth. And then you have connected them using Flow or something similar to Flow. And so imagine that you have these buildings being products, but then you have roads being these automations or these serverless automations that are listening to a webhook and sending that data into another system, or looking at a drop folder and then taking that CSV file and importing that into a different system. So you basically are in a stage where there's all these roads connecting all these systems, but then let's cast over this fog over Sydney, and suddenly you can barely see the applications that you have, but you really could not see the integrations, and you could not really see if these integrations are happening correctly or if they have failed overnight. So if there was a bottleneck or if there was an error that happened with one of the integrations, that could be quite critical to your business. Say if a sales opportunity from your website was lodged in the website, but it never made it through to a CRM to be followed up by an employee. That could be potentially leading to a lost lead or a lost project. So something like that could be, quite business critical. So what I saw was that, okay, increasingly so many businesses are going to have so many serverless automations. They really need a way to quickly see all this and then bring that forward, identify what are business critical, and then make sure those are monitored correctly. So chapter 2, what is the actual technical solution? And of course, why is it serverless? If these flows are all serverless, then the solution to monitor and scale with them should also be serverless. That's how I imagine. We talked to some customers. One of the customers we were trialing, we had a chat with their IT and we asked, "Oh, how many users have currently created Power Apps or Flow?" And they don't really know, so they made a guess. They say, "Well, we have a couple thousand users. We think probably 100 have started using Power Apps and Flow, but we're not really sure." And that's part of why they're thinking at this stage to put in some sort of monitoring and governance around this. So we say, well, no worry. If we don't know the number, once we start scanning, it will see everything, and then we'll be able to do some pull from that, and then be able to work from that baseline. So we did a full scan, and the full scan for this company took about 40 minutes to finish. And then we could look at all the flows and the Power Apps that are created. And it turns out the number of users that have already created a flow in this company was 300. So 3 times more than what IT thought. There are also challenges when these business critical flows are created, perhaps under one employee's user account, but that employee has then since left the company. So some business critical flows may begin to fail because they can no longer connect to that system because that employee has been disabled. So that was kind of an eye-opener situation for one of our trial companies who are like, okay, we should really look at putting in some governance earlier. Right, the technical stack, there are several components of it. I want to look at the storage aspect. The storage for us, we mainly are using just reliable cloud storage. We do have a NoSQL database. We have several requirements because we're scanning different companies. We needed all the data to be partitioned correctly. Some companies, particularly in talking to European customers, there are additional GDPR requirements, and we think about, okay, a lot of these privacy issues are easier if we don't actually host their data. So if we just provide the scanning service, but they bring their own Azure resource group, and then we just write into that resource group. So that's how we see this. Cloud storage is very cheap now. Being serverless, you can easily redesign or change part of your design. So you can have data ingest into a transactional database or a NoSQL database, but large amounts of these flow runs are historic, so they don't even need to live in the database. You can snapshot them monthly into static JSON files and then just file them into archive storage. So lots to think about. Serverless Compute is using Azure Functions, and this is our standard function as a service that we write a single purpose worker functions to do a specific thing, maybe to look at a flow, then to look at whether that flow has many runs, and then to look at, oh, some runs have failed, then let's go deeper and see if there are errors in that flow run and then capture that error. So we can service these and say, okay, of this particular one flow, which runs several times a day, we have several hundred runs, and then out of that, 2% of them are fails, and then the errors that you see are these errors that are happening with these flows. So we capture all that and report those. We also use Azure Functions to build a GraphQL using Apollo Server. And this really is so that we have the ultimate flexibility in providing a rich API to our front end and our reporting components. But at the same time, Apollo shields us from our decisions that we are making on the backend data storage. So the GraphQL server figures out how to fetch the data and it will feed it back. GraphQL let us extend that schema over time, which is really, really flexible. So I highly recommend using GraphQL for that purpose. If you are not using GraphQL, you tend to end up designing lots and lots of different sets of REST API endpoints. I would caution against that now. Like GraphQL is just a much easier way to manage. Our front end is using Angular, and that's just something that we are really good at. We've been doing Angular for a very long time. These are deployed using Azure Static websites. Recently, there is a new product called Azure Static Web Apps, which deploys from your GitHub repo. We are using the previous iteration of that Azure Static websites, and we deployed that through Azure DevOps. I still remember the first version we built, it was just right click and deploy. I know I'm violating all sorts of DevOps rules, but that was what we started. We just build the application, run it locally, right click and deploy, and it was running in Azure, and we were really happy. Now we're going to build a separate dev build and a prod build. That was the point that we put everything into DevOps. As we roll out to multiple data center regions in US and Europe, the DevOps pipeline really helps us synchronize that. You don't have to do anything manual. You just run the job and it deploys it to several Azure data centers. So Cloudflare manages the CDS and CDN, and then that points it to our static website. So this is a very high level picture. I draw this picture using a SaaS product called IsoFlow. I just like how everything is in the same isometric. There are not many icons, so you'll see I end up using the same icon for almost everything. But basically, I wanted to focus, and I color coded this. Our core product looks like this, the purple lines here. We have our Azure Angular static website. It is connected to our Azure Functions proxy, which is also functioning as our API gateway, and that is sitting in front of our Apollo GraphQL. And that talks to our storage. And that storage could be NoSQL, could be blob storage. It's just things that happen in the backend. So that is the main product that we built initially. We needed this blue line, which is actually a separate set of tasks. These are also all serverless functions. And they talk to the Microsoft APIs so that we can collect the information we need to report whether these integrations, these flows are running correctly. Then we build the green line, which is our rules engine, which is really upon events that are happening within the GraphQL, which is generally because it was scanned from the system, we can send alerts to say, hey, these flows have become orphaned, or this super business critical flow is now erroring. So we can call out to webhooks. So that was an additional system that we built, and I labeled that green. And then also we built a custom connection. In the Power Platform, custom connection is an open API file or Swagger file, and that's anyone using the Power Platform. So you can actually use Power Platform to talk to our system, which scans your Power Platform. So it's kind of a it's an interesting kind of recursive thing that developers like to do. Also, if you're coming from Power BI, you can access our GraphQL. So we expose our GraphQL as our API access point that different systems, both us and our customers, can access that. That's a high-level map of and this is kind of the stack that we built. Now, we're pretty happy with the stack and we're happy that we built it with serverless, because this ended up being a stack that grew with us over time. And you can see the different lines that we added to the system. A lot of the individual pieces are functions, but it is not just functions. The stack is made up of a buffet of serverless components. We have the static websites, we have orchestration, so the serverless orchestration, we have serverless databases, and in Azure, we have Azure SQL Serverless but we also have Cosmos DB that's now serverless as well. Outside of the Azure stack, we've also looked at Google's Firebase, which is an excellent serverless database, as well as AWS DynamoDB, that is also really good. We look at event pipeline, so we have Azure Event Grid, the API routing, so the API gateway product, that's also serverless. Serverless are so cost effective to experiment. So for us, it makes sense for us to try using Cosmos DB and load that with a bunch of real data and then run that for 2 weeks, run that for 4 weeks, just to see if it has the performance benefits as well as what does it look like from the cost perspective and how will we and it gives us ideas about how to use this. And also it gives us a way to back out. Like if that component does not work so well, then we can roll back and say, no, for now we will stay on blob storage and storage accounts as well. So the third chapter, I want to talk about something that I wish I knew before I started. What I wish I knew. And from my consulting time, I knew many of the technical components, right? So you kind of knew, look, I need a serverless function here. I need some logic apps here. I need a database over there. But I've never tried to put everything together end to end. So that is actually super exciting and something that I really enjoy. What I didn't know, and these are things that they were mostly not technical problems. They were just things that I just did not know. I don't have the startup vocabulary. So I thought we'll go through a little quick check of the rules of a startup. Why do we build startup and what is the point of a startup? And I wanted to boil it down to these three. We start here. I start here. If you haven't started, I would like to inspire you to start from step one. I have this amazing idea that I want to bring to life. You dream and then you want to bring that to life. Now, the real rules of a startup is you need to build something that people will pay for, because if you build something that nobody wants to buy, you will run out of money and then you have to sadly shut down your startup. So you need to get to two. If you can get this loop happening, then you get your successful startup. And you need this to happen before you run out of money. This is the end state. Don't want to go here. You want this to be the cycle. So how do you go from the amazing idea to something that people will pay for? There are really two words here. One is called experiment. You need to build lots and lots of experiments. Different experiments, they could be tweaks of the product. It could be talking to customers with a sketch of an idea. But if that idea is really not working and you need to flip that idea upside down, that's when we use a different way. It's called a pivot. So you pivot to the correct idea, not the original idea, but the correct idea. So lots of experimentation will string this loop, and then ideally, hopefully, you will get to build something that people will gladly pay for. Okay, that's the rule of how startup works. And you want to make this loop as short as quickly, and your main benefit is able to experiment quicker and be able to execute quicker. So abuse that as your startup advantage. Now, second thing I wish I knew is marketing. And as a developer-minded person and perhaps as a consultant, always building projects for other customers, there was always the thought that, well, if you build it well enough, then people will come, right? If you build it and there's no adoption, then that just means you didn't build it well enough. If you build it well, then surely people will use it. In reality, that's probably not so true. If you build it, no, they won't come. You have to talk about it. And that could be as far as building an entire marketing pipeline. So, talk to people about it, talk to your potential customers about it, build awareness that you are building this product, give a talk in serverless days about your product, and do all these things. And then additionally, you need to actually build systems to measure that pipeline too. So you're building all these marketing pipeline, they're leading signals, and maybe they're leading people to your website. Maybe they're leading people to your YouTube channel. And then from there, are they leading people to your product? And are they leading people to that trial page, right? So all that, measure that pipeline. If you measure the pipeline, it gives you the ability to tweak what you're doing in your marketing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Similar to marketing, you have a different pipeline. It's called the sales pipeline or the sales funnel. You have to go and sell it. And I have nearly 2 years now was when I first integrated Stripe payment system with our first product. And for some reason, it just took me weeks, several weeks to make that work. And I think the main reason is my mind is so much in the I'm building my core product. This getting Stripe integrated is an auxiliary function, and my heart was just not in it. So I dragged, and finally I put everything in, and it's all working. And then it's been working ever since, right? It's the people are able to trial the product. Stripe will manage the trial period, and it's working so well for the last 2 years. It felt like a struggle when I wrote it, but afterwards it was like, wow, I should have wrote that a lot earlier. Build your sales pipeline, integrate sales into your product, and then also regularly reconsider your pricing. Pricing is not a thing that's said and then forget and you never change. Particularly early startups, if you come across a startup that's in that stage where they're still trying to figure out their pricing, then generally you can get away with very cheap discounts. So support your favorite startups while they're young. Usually they reward you with some sort of grace period of the cheap price, which really will help your business as well. That's the third 3 points. One more point. I thought I'm building a product. And that goes back to maybe I come from a consultant. I thought I'm just building a product. If I build a product, people love my product, they'll buy my product. No, actually you're building a startup. And the startup is less about the product than it is about the business. Building a startup is building a business. But there are a lot of strong parallels, and I kind of want to drag this out. When we think about product or a project, it has technical components. It has these React or Angular libraries that we attach. There's a Apollo library that we use here. There is an Azure function here, and there is a Cosmos DB there. They are technical components, and that ties to a product. A business, though, has processes. And I talked about some of them earlier. Your marketing pipeline or your marketing funnel is a process. Your sales funnel is a process. A business is made up of these processes and it makes the entire machine work, right? If you just think about a product, you end up building a product that has no customers. You need the processes to bring in the marketing, the awareness, to teach people about your product, and then bring them to try your product, and then bring them to buy your product. Right, so it is the processes that makes the startup work because the startup is more like a business than purely a product. So processes, hold on to processes because we're about to talk about processes. Many of these processes can be vastly improved if you find the right SaaS solution to help us. Right? So you come up with a way of doing your marketing or you come up with a way of doing your sales. You don't have to build all that from scratch. You could usually find a SaaS solution that will plug very neatly into that position. So we should focus on what we can provide. And everything else, billing, handling credit cards, doing marketing, tracking your users as they use your application. These should be just SaaS products that you purchase and plug into your system. Don't build things that are not core to your product. Just buy a SaaS that will help you. Okay, and this actually lead me back to that starting point, right? And as we start to build this out, we need integration, right? These different SaaS applications that we're using, we need them to integrate together. All this is to help that idea of how can we experiment something fast. If a component in our product doesn't work, whether it's an Azure or AWS component, we just replace that component. If it's a SaaS product that doesn't fit our pipeline, our processes, then we replace that SaaS product. So ultimately, many businesses, from the beginning I talked about, many businesses use a lot of SaaS applications. In a way, I realize that many businesses, including my own business, use a bunch of SaaS applications. And we all live in a world where we are choosing the best of breed products that helps our business, and then we're using serverless to connect them together. So I'm back to ISOflow again, and this is a different diagram. So the earlier diagram was about one of my products. This diagram is actually about my entire startup. And here you can see these are two of our products, Clarity and Studio, that we sell. We do application insights. We use Mixpanel to track user engagement. And then these are integrated, this green line, these are flows that integrate them into our core database. From there, we take information off to HubSpot, which is our CRM. We take information off to Office 365. And then this is also connected to our DevOps. So our teams are here. Our planner, which are task boards, are here in Office 365. And then our teams are notified when we do DevOps, which does the push out to our products. Over here, we also have our blog and YouTube feeding through Google Analytics into our database. We have Stripe payments feeding information via webhooks. We have our QuickBooks feeding information into both documents and also to our database. And then we have MailerLite, which does our monthly newsletter. And then whether people unsubscribe or engage or click with those newsletters, we feed that also back to our database. So the startup is made up of processes, each one using a SaaS application, but all these are integrated together, right? And so as I look at the green lines, which are actually flows that we've written for our own startup, we can see when the flow fails, then there is actually an integration problem between, say, Google Analytics and our database. Okay, see this red line. So that's really the North Star of the problem that my startup set out to solve, which was when a business integrates all their systems together using something like Microsoft Flow, then we can clearly visualize and blow away that fog that you see at the beginning of the talk. We'll blow away that fog and then make it clear where are the critical processes, so are they being monitored. A very quick summary of the 3 chapters. Microsoft's Power Platform, it has created 3.5 million serverless local developers. They don't know this, but they're all using serverless technology. 2, I talk about our stack, and the main point that I wanted to make was that it really gave us the freedom to pick and choose multiple components. We can experiment with products that were created by Azure or AWS quickly to see which one is the best fit. So that helped us experiment quicker. The 3 is you should let serverless handle the technology side because you are trying to make your dream come true. For that to come true, your startup needs to be successful. And for your startup to be successful, you must focus on how can you experiment quicker so that you can get to product market fit and produce the product that your customers will pay for, right? So you need to be focused on building and growing and executing all the processes for your startup. Let serverless worry about the tech. It is exciting to build a serverless startup, but it is also super flexible to change with you. And that's the end of my talk. You can contact me on Twitter at John N. Liu, so there's an extra N. And you can have a look at my product, powerclarity.app. I have a few links I wanted to share. If you're keen to try the Power Platform, go to arca.ms, try Power Apps, and you can learn that for free. There is a whole tutorial where you could follow through. You can also try Azure Functions if you're a pro developer and wanted to see what it's like, the experience to create serverless functions on the Azure stack. Join the community newsletter. Make sure you go to arca.ms, Azure Serverless Swag, and claim your free swag. Thank you very much. I had a load of fun preparing for this talk. I'm sure some of you would have been building startups for way longer than I have. So I'm very keen to hear any feedback you have for me. Reach out to me if you have any questions for me or let me know, give me any feedbacks. I hope you enjoy the rest of Serverless Days. Enjoy many of the sessions and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.